now let's get into general strategies. You've really sketched already the relationship between really individual well-being and collective well-being,
Yeah.
or the ways in which our relationships are really an important source of personal resilience and well-being. So you definitely sketched that, and in a moment we'll get into specific actions. But before we go further, I wonder if you could speak a little personally. Uh, what have you seen about that in yourself, that your own potential, your own big potential, is really grounded in your relationships?
I see it when I struggle or I get tired or when I get burned out. I know that having other people around me helps so much. One of my favorite studies in Big Potential is not mine. It came from two researchers in Virginia that found that if you're looking at a hill in front of you by yourself, if I'm perceiving a hill I have to climb, my brain judges that hill as being 10 to 20% steeper than if I was viewing a hill of the exact same height, but standing next to a friend 3 feet apart from me. So even the existence of somebody else in my world changes my perspective on that objective reality and makes those challenges I have in front of me seem less steep. It's the meaning when I get to meet up with other authors or practitioners and people who have made a positive impact upon the world like yourself. This is what I'm hungry for, because you want that connection. You want to know that that other people understand what you're going through. So I see it. I see it on a daily basis in terms of how that makes it meaningful. And for me, like, it's, when I go out and speak at a school and then come back 3 years later and they've done something I never thought of before, and that they're creating. I just went out to Orlando Health, and it's a hospital where the night after the night pulse shootings occurred, we had been doing where they send all the trauma victims. We'd been working with them for 2 years before this, trying to increase resilience of the medical staff there. And they would start their staff meetings with things that they were grateful for. So when something bad happened, they had this storehouse. And then the morning after the night pulse shooting, the second largest shooting in US history, they started with gratitudes again, because they knew that's what is going to help their emotional immune system as they're dealing with this. So I went back out there to see what they're doing, and they came up with something. They had a random act of kindness parade where they would go, and instead of just sending an email to somebody to praise them, they would have 10 people go to their room. But as they walk in this parade to that person's room, people would start to come and connect in. And so by the time we got there, because I was videotaping, walking and watching this beautiful thing happen, 25 to 30 people came out of their offices to see what was going on and followed. So there was 30 people there, and I looked around the room, and it wasn't just the person receiving the praise, it was the 30 people that were part of something to make somebody else's life better. And when they went back to their offices, they're engaged, they're positive, they're going to be more resilient. And so I think that that's it. As I see this over and over again, and I see it in my own life, is that it's the inclusion of others in that pursuit of happiness and success that makes it all worthwhile.
You're clearly a warm and relational person, and a person might think, well, it was easy for you, Sean, to be friendly and likable and connect with other people. Uh, Other people might have a lot of struggles there. So I kind of wondered for you, if I could ask again, how you yourself learn to reach more out into, or be more open to, or nest your own success and achievement in a context of relationships. What have you had to learn along the way, and what was challenging for you?
Um, a lot of things are challenging that might not seem it, because I'm introverted actually, or ambivert. Even like this podcast, I've been thinking about it all morning. So and stressing about it. I knew I had it coming up today, and so I feel it takes a lot to be able to connect out to other people, but I get such a return on it. It makes it worthwhile. But the turning point for me was when I was depressed while I was at Harvard. I kept thinking I can beat depression all by myself. I've got this. I'm smart. I can check off these metrics of success. So this is one more thing I can beat all by myself. And the more I thought that, the worse I got, actually. The turning point for me was when I stopped trying to be perfect to other people and personable and funny and nice and awesome and be there for other people. And instead, I went to my 8 closest friends and told them, I've been going through depression. I hadn't told you about it, but I actually really need your help. And it was amazing, because suddenly I got this groundswell of support from them. But also, because I wasn't trying to be perfect, right? To be that, person I thought I had to be, they opened up about how they were dealing with addiction or the loneliness or depression themselves. So then it wasn't me trying to help myself, which is a weak position, or somebody else having to help me, which is a victim position or weak position also. But instead, we were helping one another able to lift up in that moment. So I was helping them and being a friend. I was allowing them to be a friend. So what made me realize is that, it's not about being perfect at all. It's not about trying to be amazing and solve all these problems for other people. That when we open up, that's why I try in every single talk I do is talk about depression, to be able to give voice to that, because it's so easy for someone to hear this and say, well, of course he's happy. He's a happiness researcher. His wife's a happiness researcher, right? To realize that these are struggles that we all deal with and that we're not alone. And as soon as we realize we're not alone, those hills in front of us seem less steep.
Yeah. Thank you for being willing to be prodded by me to speak so personally. I really appreciated it.
Sure.
I wondered if I could build on that and just ask you also, so earlier today, you were, as you said, obsessing about this interview, this conversation. And if you're willing to just say, what resources did you draw on inside your own being, inside yourself to practice with that which was stirred up in you? I think that would be willing to be personal about that as well. That could serve a lot of people.
I think it's two things. I think one of it is I go back to previous experiences that have been positive. So I've been on podcasts before. I've gotten to share this research before. I can think of 1 or 2 times that didn't go well, but the other 100, 200 times went great. They look at like professional golfers and ask them how they don't choke at the end of a tournament. And they go back and think about times that they've had a putt the same way and they got it in. So they just go back and think about those successes. So that helps because part of my brain will start to recreate or as Brene Brown says, dress rehearse tragedy, right? Like I'll think about how things could go wrong. My wife will sometimes ask me, what do you think is actually going to go wrong? And I usually don't have something. It's just like, but what if? And then it stops, which is such an irrational position. So one of them is going back to the successes that I had. The other one is I love this new research on big potential. There's something about the connectedness of the happiness, the pursuit of happiness that makes me feel like this is why I'm here. And so that energy pushes me forward, even when I sometimes don't feel it. So I think that's what makes it contagious is that passion as well. So I think it'd be those two things that help.
Okay, so now let's talk about specific actions. In terms of big potential, you emphasize 5 things. I wonder if you could summarize them and just sketch them kind of as a group, and then we'll go into each one.
So we were looking to see what type of individuals seem to achieve interconnected success instead of just individual success, which is small potential. And we looked to see that they seem, business, a student, medical provider, they seem to kind of have a couple umbrella categories of actions that they would do. They would surround themselves with positive people. They would extend power to other people. They'd enhance the people around them, which is so important because if others are the height of your potential is predicted by others, then you want to enhance them. Defending the system against any things that might pull you back from those gains, and then sustaining the gains by creating collective momentum and celebrating.
I'm excited already. It's like a rising tide floating all the boats and all the rest of that. So let's go into each one of them kind of briskly, especially in terms of practical things that people engaging this summit can do. So you want to start with the first one?
Sure. So the first one is to make sure that you're surrounded by people that fuel you. Oftentimes we could be surrounded by lots of people in our lives, but they're pulling away from us. Or that's our job is to be there for them, but it's not a reciprocal relationship, or that they're currently in a negative state. So we look to see who are the people you're spending the most time with, and check to make sure that they're actually positive influencers. And if they're not, try to increase just slightly the amount of time you're spending with those people. So if you have a friend you don't ever talk to, but every time you do, you feel so fueled for 2 or 3 months afterwards to try exercising or meditating again, setting up a phone call and just talk to that person, or an email just to reconnect to that person to get you that benefit. So what you're looking at, instead of trying to create an individual star, you're looking at how do you create the entire star system. Look for people that help bridge you to other people that make you go outside of your comfort zone. So we look first at how to surround yourselves. And as I went through depression, the turning point, as I mentioned, was going out to tell people that I needed help. That surrounding was the core of how I was able to get through the depression. And it's actually the core of how we achieve our big potential. Extend. One of the things we've been finding is that happiness can seem like a huge burden if it's all about you. So we extend power back out to other people to help them to be able to be part of this as well. So I let my friends know that I needed their support. So suddenly I'm giving them power to have a positive influence upon me, so that they could actually help. Or if I'm a leader at a company, making sure that I'm getting advice or information from other people and listening to them so that I can empower them to be positive but also activated. And when I do that, it makes the burden upon me so much easier.
So you're talking in the first one about surround yourself with positive influencers, creating star systems and so forth, a system of stars.
Yeah.
But what do you do with people who are obligated? Maybe they live with someone, they're in a marriage and they're staying in that marriage for various reasons, or they have a job for to maintain their health insurance. They're stuck in the job, they need to keep doing it. That's not a positive influence.
Yeah.
What can people do in those situations?
I think that those people need to surround themselves with positive people even more so.
But,
So what that means is,
but what about reducing the impact of the negative?
I think so. I think there's two things. If you can reduce the impact of the negative, do so. But and the experiences you just described are times when we can't, right? Like a
Mm.
job where we can't decrease some of those negative influences, or a spouse that we care about that we can't leave. And I think in those cases, that's when we have to rely upon other people to fuel us, right? Because otherwise, we're just trying to do this alone, and that marriage seems exhausting. That work seems exhausting. A therapist who is always there for their clients, but doesn't have a recharge place, or a
Yeah.
pastor, right? Can be, as you know, it can be extraordinarily draining. And so what we want those people to do is to find those people in their life, their friends, their family members, a coach, a teacher, a life coach, a therapist who fuels them, that makes them feel like they can reconnect to meaning, and just try to increase the time that they spend with that person. There is a guy named Jim Rohn who said you're an average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I'm not sure if there is scientific validity to it, but I think that there's um, real truth to the idea that we start to become the people we surround ourselves with. So looking to see who those people are has a huge impact when we can't control it.
I think you're right. And also, as other research shows, as we internalize the sense of being with these people who are supportive, beneficial to us, as we kind of take that in increasingly, then we have kind of more shock absorbers or brake pads between
Yes,
us and what's grinding on us in the job or the marriage. And we're more able to shrug it off and take it less personally.
absolutely. And then in there, you see resilience being an interconnected ability again. So I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah. Fueled in that way. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay, so I interrupted you. Sorry about that. I just
Oh,
wanted to flag you were talking about the second suggestion or strategy, expand your power. You call it leading from every seat. I don't quite know what that means. Can you talk more about that?
sure. So I worked with a school in Iowa, a poor school in Iowa, Cardinal High School District. They're bottom 10% school. They wanted to create positive change. So they started creating these positive interventions, but instead of the leader trying to make positive culture, which that's possible, right? You have to get a culture to create a culture. Um, he went out and got the bus drivers to write positive notes to each of the students that would go home to the parents. He had the lunch staff providing not only mashed potatoes, but also words of affirmation to the students as they came through. So when a student thinks about school, they think about all those things. They don't just think about the teachers and the administrators.
Yeah.
So what was valuable about this is that he expanded the power out to other people. He looked to see who were the positive people and gave them power. He put them on all the committees. He headed up the committees. Didn't matter who joined the committee, as long as it was led by somebody who was positive in those moments. He activated the bus drivers. He activated the librarians. As a side note, their ACT scores over the past 5 years rose 3.5 points, which is stunning. They have a 92% graduation rate now and a 95% attendance rate. And for the first time in Iowa history, kids from the richer counties are coming to the poorest county in Iowa to get a better education. So these things work when we actually expand power back out to other people. So look to see who you could activate within your life. So can you tell, like, if you are trying to create happiness or overcome depression, which one of your friends can you activate to be there for you, right? If you're trying to create positive change, like you want to start exercising, how can you empower other people to encourage you to do this, right? Let them know your schedule, share your Google Calendar with them. When you do so, you actually give them the power to help you instead of having to carry it alone.
Okay, that's really great. I really get that. You're really talking about helping other people around you shine and feeding them, thinking about what do they need, what's the longing in their heart.
Yeah.
That if you could do a little thing which could have a big impact,
Hmm.
what could you do for them, and which helps them, of course, out of benevolence, but eventually feeds back to you too.
Yeah. And I see it with being a dad too, right? So trying to get my son to go to sleep quickly because I want to do something else. And I try and race them through things, and and if you push, they dig their heels in. But when and you probably tried this as well. Like I was like, let's see if you can get your own clothes on, right? Like, and encourage. I was like, wow, you're already 4 years old. This is amazing. And suddenly, because I expanded power out to him, right? He felt engaged. He put on his clothes pretty well. But now, and then I was like, let's see, can you put daddy to sleep instead of you? So he tried to put me to sleep, but he started falling asleep as he was doing it. And so my happiness was contingent upon him falling asleep, but I was able to recruit him into that process to deputize him to make more change, not only for him, but for me as well.
That's really great. I relate to that as a dad myself. Okay, your third suggestion is enhance your resources. Can you say more what you mean by that?
This is my favorite one because it actually, I noticed something I was making a mistake on. We all know we're supposed to praise and recognize. So as parents, we're supposed to praise, leaders are supposed to praise and recognize, and increases productivity, all these things. We've seen research come out, Carol Dweck and others who are saying we've been praising wrong, right? We need to be praising the process that leads to an outcome, not the outcome. Otherwise, people get stuck on the outcomes. We need to start praising in the first place. A lot of people talk about the negative and then forget about praising. But the thing that flipped for me is I realized that with Big Potential, that a lot of the praise I was giving wasn't praise, it was comparison. Like, you're the fastest person on your team. Wow, you worked harder than anyone on that project. You gave the best talk of it. Your research is the best research that's out there, right? As I do that, first of all, I've diminished the other people around you in that ecosystem. But in addition to that, I've also unhinged you, because sometimes you might not be the best researcher or best speaker or the fastest person in the class. So that comparison makes success zero sum and makes the whole system fragile. If we want to increase resilience, what you do is I think you praise things that are internal qualities there, right? Like, instead of praising you for being the best speaker, I loved your comedic timing, or I love that you have so much research in your talk, or whatever it is. Or I saw you practicing so hard for that spelling test instead of you were the best speller in the class. What that does in those moments is it enhances those people around you. And then also there's an opportunity to praise not just the people who are the ones with the highest outcome, but the people who were supporters that got them there. So I go to all these sales conferences and they bring up the top performer on stage, and 96%, 95% of the workforce is sitting bored and disengaged in the audience watching these people come up on stage, right? Instead, what they should do is, if somebody has a top performer, have them bring up the person who got them there, the supporter who got them there, praising the base instead of just the top. When you do that, the entire system starts to shine differently. In the same way, if a parent, instead of just praising the kid who scored the goal, that kid already got praise, right? They scored a goal, people cheered, being like, wow, that's amazing, you scored that goal. Thank you to your mom for getting us out here when it was raining. I wasn't going to come. Or thanks for your sister for sitting there cheering the entire time during that game. She's part of the reason that you're probably so successful. That way, the praise gets refracted instead of absorbed just at the top. I think that those things can really enhance the ecosystem of potential around us.
This is fantastic stuff. All right. How about the fourth suggestion? I think you call it defend against negative influences, protecting the system against attacks. What do you mean by that?
So once I start talking about interconnectedness, people immediately start thinking, now I'm connected to all these people that are negative, or people on social media that are writing negative posts. I would shield ourselves from those negative posts. I think there's some unique ways to do that. But I think in a hyper-connected world, we also need to find ways of defending the gains within the system. And so one of those is things, you and I have both talked about for years, is building that emotional immune system from the beginning. Doing things like practicing gratitudes, meditation, journaling about positive experiences, exercise, writing positive notes for other people, altruism, art, any of those things that have those positive impact, those create a core that when I'm now hyper-connected, I have greater levels of defense, like you described just a few minutes ago. But in addition to that, I've been looking at other things that are practical to help us defend. One of those is, I think the most practical is a mental moat, like a moat around a castle. The weakest parts of the day for our brain is right when we wake up and right when we go to sleep. We have the weakest because we're in a fatigue state without calories, we oftentimes find ourselves in the weakest possible place. But that's when we check the news. That's when we check social media right before we go to sleep in our email, and our brain processes it all night. So what I do is I set a moat around my day. I still look at the news. I still have to look at those emails, but I don't do it in the first 30 minutes or last 30 minutes of the day. So I'm actually making sure that my brain is slightly more defended. I'm ensuring that I have the mental resources necessary to be there during those tasks to help me when I do have to experience the negative.
What do you think about people being assertive with regard to negative influences? What do you say about that?
I love it. That's something I need to work on. I have my wife calls in everywhere for me. Like if I have a dental appointment, I get nervous about doing that, so she calls in for me. So I need to work on assertiveness for sure. I think it's valuable. I think that would be an amazing tactic. I'm probably just the wrong person to ask about that because I grew up in a conflict avoidant household. My reaction is to either, shower that person with kindness or to retreat to a strategic retreat to deepen those emotional resources and to deal that person when they're maybe in a more positive state themselves. But you're right. If we were more assertive and let people know, I gave a talk one time, and this guy stood up in the middle of the meeting and was like, we don't need to hear all this. All this is common sense. Gratitude's good for you. Good job, buddy. And he sat back down. And the senior leader came up to me afterwards and was like, "Did you remember that guy who stood up?" I was like, "I definitely remember him." He was like, "I was shocked to hear him say that because he's the most unhappy person we have working here. He walks around the room. It's like this negative cloud goes everywhere with him.
Like negative Wi-Fi.
Yeah. He had no awareness that he was the negative influence within those moments. So actually having the opportunity to have the leader talk about that negative influence might shed light and create that click moment where that person realizes, oh, I might actually be the problem in this situation instead of not. And as soon as you realize there's a problem, there's an opportunity to fix it.
Well, in a way, I think actually you're the right person to talk with about assertiveness because it's not that natural to you, let's say. And I find myself wondering, also in the context of big potential, perhaps how you personally have drawn on others to help you be more assertive in appropriate ways.
Well, my wife stopped calling the dental places, so I have to do that myself. She said it's good for me, so she's trying to build my resilience. So I think that's helpful. But also, I know if I have people around me, or if I have an assigned role, both of those things seem to help. So if I'm by myself sitting on a plane, and I see somebody do something negative, unless it's pretty egregious, I might not say something. But if it's egregious, I'm definitely going to say something just because of how bad it is. But if I have a person sitting next to me, my friend who's coming on the trip with me, I suddenly become much more empowered because you have the social resources that are there. So other positive people that are with you can have a positive influence upon those situations. So I think that helps.
Yeah, the term sometimes gets used, as you know, as allies.
Yeah.
Both external allies and the internal sense of allies who are with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, how about the last one? You talk about sustain the gains, creating collective momentum. Can you talk more about that?
So I think oftentimes when we have successes within the system, we ignore them, right? The news is mostly negative because it's already good, or because if something's already good, I don't need to learn about it. Just tell me about the bad stuff, right? And that creates this mentality where our brains scan for the negative, but we miss out on all the things that actually fuel us. One of the things I do when I create New Year's resolutions about goals for the year, I don't start with the resolutions of what I'm hoping for in the future. Because those are all deficits, right? I haven't done something yet. Instead, I start with what are 3 things I actually accomplished last year, regardless if they were resolutions last year. Like, what are things I felt were valuable or meaningful or overcome in the past year? So now when my brain is then thinking about those new things, it's not me starting at 0. It's like, look at all this progress I've had. And now I'm trying to just climb to the next plateau, which is a completely different look at at the way of processing the world. So what we've been trying to do is get people to celebrate those successes, not individually, but with other people as well. I found with my book launch, I don't really want to have a book launch party because I thought it was about me or about my book. And I realized that's a mistake because it's an opportunity to celebrate with other people, right? And the book's about other people. So I think it's a lot about that mentality. One of the things I learned as I was working with hospitals is that the highest engagement places in the hospital, highest levels of happiness are the cancer wards repeatedly, which I would have not thought that's the case at all. Children's cancer wards. And it's partly because they invest in happiness and gratitude just because they have to, right? And they paint the walls colorful paintings, and they invite people in, and they have people that are involved in this process. But at one of the places I was working with in California, they actually had when somebody went into remission, they would have a little tea party for them, and then more people wanted to come, and then somebody brought in a gong, so it became the remission gong, and the party grew, and people would fly in for these parties. So they celebrated the success there, but the rest of the hospital doesn't celebrate whether your gallbladder was removed successfully. We don't celebrate, you got over the flu. You go back to the doctor if things are bad. You don't call the doctor and be like, my flu went away, right? So there is no reward within the system. So if we want to create collective momentum, we've got to be able to identify those successes, highlight them, celebrate them, and that's what moves us forward.
What can people do when they've had a setback? So they want to sustain their momentum, like you're saying, but something has come up, they've had a setback. What can a person do to gather themselves or draw on other resources in their network? What have you seen, maybe a story about people or in your own life?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one is you've got a setback in your brain that will loom large. So you've got to go back and look at other times when you've overcome something, right? You got into a school you wanted to go to. You thought you'd never get to date that person, and you got to date them. You thought you'd never get married, and you got married, right? With this whole experience with our daughter, Zoe, she's born 2 months early, right? I did everything I could, to research how important it is to go full term. and then my wife was gonna be in the hospital for 6 weeks because her water broke during the Super Bowl. And then we're like, okay, here's how you keep it in. A week later, I had no control, right? The baby just came anyway. And so I think what it is in those moments is I got to go back to times where I've been able in the past to overcome periods of depression. I have gotten on stage when I was terrified to do so. I got a negative review and kept writing and got better at writing. And those moments give me power there, but also then not trying to do it just by yourself, but recruiting. I love your idea of allies, recruiting allies. If that research is true, that hills seem less steep when I'm looking at them with somebody as opposed to myself, then I've got to recruit allies in this process instead of feeling like, okay, here's something I've got to get over all by myself. And once I do, then I'll reemerge back into these relationships. So reaching out instead of hunkering down seems to be helpful.